Well, that was Ukraine's Prosecutor General talking to me a little earlier. Let me show you a few more of the pictures, because already water levels rising so rapidly in the surrounding areas. We were talking just now to the chair of the Defence Select Committee, talking about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. Just the head of the nuclear watchdog saying there's no immediate risk to the safety of that plant. There are a number of alternative water sources for their cooling units. We're back with more in just a moment or two.
Now on BBC News, the biggest African and international news stories. Focus on Africa.
Live from Nairobi, this is Focus on Africa on BBC News. Our top stories. Out of control. That's the warning from nursing leaders who say the talent drain of staff from Ghana to richer nations will badly damage the country's healthcare system.
All our critical care nurses, our experienced nurses are all gone to them. So virtually we end up having nothing, no experienced staff to work with.
Strikes and protests over rising prices and increasing taxes threaten to cause disruption in Nigeria and Kenya.
We are suffering in short. People need money, and that money is being taxed. You are being taxed twice for something that you need to get free. So we need that financial ability to go down.
Also in the program, the fight for basic survival. 3 million people have now fled their homes in Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso because of an acute lack of food. Well, thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa. I'm Waihiga Mwaura. The International Council of Nurses says the recruitment of nurses by high-income countries from developing countries is out of control. Here in Africa, a majority of skilled nurses, especially those working in intensive care units, are looking for greener pastures abroad. Unemployment, poor pay, and better working conditions are some of the main reasons why they are leaving. Now, a 2022 study by the World Health Organization found that African countries are unable to offer adequate essential services due to a serious shortage of health workers. They warn that tackling issues such as maternal and infant deaths, infectious and non-communicable diseases, and even services like vaccinations are an uphill task. The WHO also found that in all these countries, there's just one healthcare professional to take care of about 1,000 people. That's well below the health body's threshold, which says about 5 health workers are needed for every 1,000 people. Now, out of Africa's 54 countries, only 4, that's Mauritius, Namibia, the Seychelles, and South Africa, have enough health workers to adequately care for their population. Let's take a closer look at one country, Ghana. Medics there say the country's health system is being crippled by staff shortages due to the number of nurses leaving for jobs in the United Kingdom. And as Naomi Grimley now reports, more than 1,200 Ghanaian nurses joined the UK's nursing register in 2022 alone.
This is Ghana's best-equipped hospital in the capital, Accra. The staff here are highly trained, but there's a fundamental problem, according to the head of nursing.
Where have you brought me?
I've brought you to the second floor, Greater Accra Regional Hospital. This is the main ICU.
And what's the effect? Are you noticing nurses leaving?
Yes, the ICU nurses are leaving, and they are our main resource. They are those who take care of the seriously ill. They are experienced. And in fact, they are trained, a lot of things went in. So if it happens that we are losing them, it's a great bother to us.
In Cape Coast, the idyllic beaches disguise the fact that this is one of Ghana's most deprived regions. Yet the main hospital here complains it's lost 22 nurses to the UK.
All our critical care nurses, our experienced nurses are all gone to them. So virtually we end up having nothing, no experienced staff to work with. If even the government recruits, we have to go through the pain of training them again.
Howard Catton is from the International Council of Nurses.
My sense is that the situation currently is out of control. We have intense recruitment taking place, mainly driven by 6 or 7 high-income countries, but with recruitment from those countries who are some of the most weakest and vulnerable, who can ill afford to lose their nurses.
Ghana's economic problems mean there's no money to fund the next generation of nurses. The head doctor in this small clinic fears what all this will mean for the health of his patients.
The impact is enormous. Let's take services like immunization of children. If we lose public health nurses, then the babies that have to be immunized will not get the required immunization, and we are going to have babies die. Then they are critical care nurses. So if you lose them, it will take time to train them. And whilst they are away and whilst you are training, you might get people who need services dying.
So what do the patients themselves think?
It brings hardship to them and their families. The nurses don't make any money. Talk about giving their families some. So the monetary aspect is huge.
Because the nurses here are few and the patients are more, it can cause deaths in the hospitals. So if you can, please offer us help in Ghanaian hospitals.
The UK insists it does not recruit actively from countries with the most fragile healthcare systems. However, the Ghanaian health minister said in December that his country had been in talks with the British government to formalise the recruitment process.
We are engaging with the government of the United Kingdom, and we are just about signing a memorandum of agreement after cabinet approval to begin to send nurses, even the certificate nurses, to go for training and work there and come back home after 3 years.
The UK has already given some aid money to help boost Ghana's health workforce. But is that enough?
The deals that are being put in place smack more of trying to create some veneer of ethical respectability rather than a proper reflection of the true costs to the countries that are losing their nurses.
Meanwhile, the retention crisis goes on.
Like, our salary is nothing to write home. Within 2 weeks, you spend it. It's from hand to mouth.
This continent is used to outsiders wanting its precious resources. Today, that precious resource is nurses. Naomi Grimley, BBC News, Cape Coast, Ghana.
Let's now dig deeper into this trend, and joining me now is Nanelle Inti, a nurse who is working in the United Kingdom but is originally from Ghana. Nanelle, thanks for speaking with us. Tell us, how were you recruited?
So thank you for having me. So I was recruited back in 2018 through a recruitment agency in the UK. Yes.
And generally, what would you say your experience has been like so far?
So for most parts, very positive. I've been able to work, in state-of-the-art facilities. I've been able to work with, equipment and, advanced technology that may not be readily available where I am from. So for the most part, quite positive. I've gained new knowledge, new skills that's building me up as a nurse, which I'm very proud of. And we do have the, not so pleasant aspects as well. Coming from coming from Africa, being trained in Africa, there's this prejudice. You come here, although you're fully qualified. Some people think you're not, qualified enough to take care of British people because they probably heard negative stuff about the training or the education system in Africa. And also, so you have to, prove yourself. It takes people a while to, accept that. And also, discrimination issues, which is, in the open. A research was done by the Greenwich University, and they concluded that they found out in the research that Black nurses and Asian nurses are more likely to be, referred to the NMC based on fitness to practice issues. And usually most of these cases are dropped because the NMC, maybe through investigation, will realize that these were non-starters in the first place. So we do suffer some form of discrimination, as well.
Thank you for giving us that balanced context. I'll come back to you in just a bit, but let me bring in Tobekile Ngube, who's a nurse that was trained in the UK, but originally from Zimbabwe, and she's also a senior lecturer in nursing at the University of East London. Tobekile, I want to hear from you on this. What's that one thing you'd like people to know about the nursing system, the healthcare system in Africa, and you can refer to, Ghana or Zimbabwe, for example, as per your experience?
Hello, good evening, everyone. I think what I have learned about the different health systems between Europe and Africa are more or less going to be the same. I think the only differences are going to be the economic developments, cultural and religious differences that can impact or affect the way that nurses will perform their jobs, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in one of the 54 countries in Africa. Just like my colleague stated earlier on, yes, we do have the technology, but we should never underestimate our African colleagues. These guys are highly knowledgeable and they're highly skilled in terms of their jobs. When she spoke about discrimination, you will come across it in all NHS trusts or primary care trusts. So we're not saying that it doesn't exist, it does exist. But I think at the end of the day,
Okay, thank you so much. I want to say thanks to Nanelle Inti for joining us just to share some thoughts. And we also had Tobekile Ngube, who's both nurses with different experiences, sharing with Focus on Africa. Now, many of us over the past year or so have been feeling the pinch as the cost of living continues to skyrocket globally. Many countries are reporting significant increases in the price of food, housing, and fuel. Today, Nigeria's main trade union movement suspended its call for a nationwide strike on Wednesday to protest against a sharp increase in the price of fuel following President Bola Tinubu's recent decision to stop subsidies. This comes after fuel markets increased the price of petrol to at least $1 per litre last Wednesday. That's up by about 200%. That inevitably had a knock-on effect on the cost of food, travel, and other commodities, all while the minimum wage in Nigeria remains at about $65 per month. Well, it's a similar picture on the other side of the continent. Tear gas, angry protesters, and police. These are the scenes from today's protest here in the capital of Kenya, Nairobi. People have taken to the streets to protest against the new finance bill that critics say will pile more economic hardship on ordinary people. President Ruto and his government have drawn up a $26.2 billion budget. That's for the financial year 2023-2024. That's a lot of money to generate to repair a heavily indebted economy inherited by the new government. So how will it be done? Well, his government has drawn up the raft of new tax proposals seeking to fill the government's deleted or depleted coffers, including taxation on digital content, cryptocurrencies, and also those who earn over $43,000 a year could see a rise in their taxes. Okay, we now want to get some more context on this. Joining us here in Nairobi is our BBC correspondent, Jewel Kiriungi. Jewel, thanks for making time. Straight off the back, for those who aren't able to follow it earlier, what exactly happened in Nairobi today? And link that with that contentious finance bill for me, if you can.
Well, Waihiga, today we saw protesters taking to the streets and they were demonstrating a proposed finance bill that will seek to add some new taxes. And the main point of concern is that they feel that they're already overtaxed. They're already burdened. There has been a rising inflation in the country. We have seen the prices of basic goods and commodities going up recently. So today we saw at least 10 protesters being arrested by the police. We also saw tear gas being fired to disperse some of these demonstrators. And this is not the first time that these protests are happening. Just last Monday, trade unions representing public servants were also on the streets to protest the same bill. And Kenya's opposition has also said that they will take to the streets in case this bill is passed as is. So we did get to hear from some Kenyans on what they hear, or what they feel about this. And here's their take.
People are in the streets to demonstrate their anger, their frustrations, to demonstrate everything. We are suffering, in short. People need money, and that money is being taxed. You are being taxed twice for something that you need to get free. So we need that financial ability to go down.
We want the cost of living to come down because most of the youth are unemployed. We have single mothers who are unable to buy food for themselves. It is imperative for the cost of living to come down so that everybody is able to sustain themselves.
Calling it, and off the back of what you're seeing and what you've shown us from Nairobi, but broader, they're calling it a protest movement. We're seeing some activity, or a question about some activity in Nigeria and other parts of the continent as well. How could protest movement impact the rest of the region and the continent as well?
Well, here in Kenya, people are optimistic. The government just conducted a public participation exercise to get what the people feel about this bill. But there are concerns that if these concerns are not addressed, then you could see situations spiral out of control. If I was to give an example, back in 2018, Sudan faced protests because of rising prices of bread and fuel. And just 4 months later, the then president, Omar al-Bashir, was ousted. So this just shows that there could be a dominoes effect, not only in Nigeria or in Kenya, if the people's concerns are not taken into consideration.
Well, one thing that's for sure is that these economic shocks are touching not just the continent, but the world as well. Walk us through, because a lot of the protesters are demanding immediate action from their local and national governments. But the truth of the matter is there's a lot happening globally, and I know you might have some insights into that could mean that there may be tough days ahead. What are some examples of what the economic forecast could be moving forward?
Well, one of the major points of consideration is the current Russia-Ukraine war, which has really affected the global prices of food and fuel, and that ripple effect has been felt across Africa. We have seen countries really facing food security issues because of what's going on. We have seen other scenarios also playing out globally. So I think the focus right now is if we are able to tame some of what is happening on the global platform, then African countries would be in a better position to be able to champion some of the changes that they would like to see.
Do we have any sense of whether there could be more protests in the days to come? What are you hearing out there?
Well, in Kenya, the opposition has made it very clear that if the bill stays as is, then they will take to the streets. So that is a point to see. Just this coming Thursday, members of parliament will be debating this particular bill in parliament. We've also seen the president of Kenya being very hard on MPs and saying that he will be personally watching to see how they vote. So we will be waiting to see what transpires on Thursday and whether this would mean that we see more protests in Nairobi in general.
Great. Joel Kiriungi there giving us the Nairobi context, exactly what was happening today in Nairobi. But let's cross over to Lagos, where Azizat Olaoluwa now joins us to also walk us through what was supposed to happen there on Wednesday. But there's been some changes and she'll update us on that. Azizat, what's been the reaction of people in Lagos regarding the increase of fuel prices, and how does that impact young people as they go about in their daily lives?
You know, Nigeria is facing its worst economic crisis at the moment. 22% inflation rate, about 133 million people, multidimensionally poor, and of course unemployment rate is also very high. So you can imagine the kind of shocks the subsidy removal introduced into the system, and that is impacting on the lives of many people, especially young Nigerians who are saying that they are even underemployed. Many are still looking for jobs, and their parents cannot even afford, to feed them 3 times a day. I spoke to some Nigerians who said that the removal of fuel subsidy, which has impacted on the cost of transportation, has impacted on their lives, and they are struggling every day since then.
Like, seriously, really affected us, like seriously, most especially me, like seriously, because this is not the way the things used to be before, like especially this fuel issue, like today now, I just came all the way from Bejuleki, and it really affected me. We have taken vehicle like 700 before, from Bejuleki to here, I spent almost close to 4,000 naira. And this is where I normally spend at least like 2,000 naira before, or how much, but today I spend almost up to 4,000 naira. It's not good.
Much, I will just only ask them for them to please put the price down for us so that we can be able to go to work and make use of the cash with us.
Thank you so much, Azizat Olaoluwa, joining us from Lagos to paint a picture of what is happening there. Now, still to come, double crisis in Central Sahel as millions battle devastating effects of conflicts and climate change.
When I started in renewables 20 years ago, the only question was, is this going to work? And isn't it too expensive? Now the question is, how fast can we go to zero carbon? Solar energy really needs 4 key ingredients. Lots of sunshine, obviously, but also lots of land, because it requires a lot of space, good financing conditions and the workforce to make it all happen. And all of this, we find it here in Saudi Arabia. PIF is an extremely important partner for us in delivering essentials of life, bringing affordable, reliable and sustainable energy and water to countries and populations is really important. With such an ambitious agenda in terms of energy transition and renewable energy, that is to some extent really changing the world.
You're a raver.
Do I look like a raver?
I've got bass in a backpack. This is amazing.
Dancing for like 4 or 5 hours of a gig, you could generate about 800 kilowatt hours of thermal energy.
Right, so shall we give it a taste then? It's my favourite.
We're really talking to the plants and they're telling us how happy they are.
It can fly, but it can also float on water.
Oh my God, that came by quick. It's all about augmented reality.
Beautiful, right? Beautiful.
Totally and utterly immersed in another world there.
Your Tech Update. Click on BBC News.
Welcome back to Focus on Africa. Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso are among the world's most underdeveloped nations, and now a new report warns that a double-edged crisis has been driving humanitarian needs in the region to astronomical levels. It says that 3 million people have been forced to leave their homes and an even larger number are in dire need of food. BBC's Akisa Wandera reports.
These are the 3 countries that make up the Central Sahel region. Combined, they have a population of about 60 million people, which is just less than 1% of the global population. But they contribute 5% of the global humanitarian needs. Why is that so? Cycles of political instability and low levels of economic development have exposed more people to effects of climate change in the last decade, leaving over 16 million people in dire need of humanitarian assistance, a 172% increase since 2016. Now, communities that were already marginalized find themselves caught in between armed conflicts and the devastating impacts of climate change. Since 1960, there have been 17 successful coups in the Central Sahel region. About 3 million people have been forcibly displaced, and an alarming surge of over 2,000% in the number of internally displaced people has been witnessed. This, coupled with longer dry seasons, have worsened the food security situation, affecting more than 5 million people, with a growing number of malnourished children. Now, as droughts and floods become more frequent and intense, people's decreased abilities to cope with the loss of income, scarcity of food and water, and displacement further exposes them to instability. The Central Sahel region is now warming at a shocking 1.5 times more than the global rate. As this happens, non-state armed groups have sprung up to compete for control over populations, territories, and resources, increasing the frequency and intensity of conflicts.
Let's now bring in Modo Diao, the IRC's Regional Vice President for West Africa, to better understand what that report exactly means. Modo, thanks for speaking with Focus on Africa. So what does your report reveal that previous reports did not have insight on?
Thank you for having me. This report is actually a deep dive in order to try to understand what are the root causes of the situation of the humanitarian crisis in the Sahel, Central Sahel countries, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. As you see, the numbers are big and high, and as we less than 1% of the population of the world, but the population impacted represented like 5% of the total population affected by humanitarian crisis. So this report revealed a long and deep how I can say, link between climate crisis, climate changes, if I can say, conflict and economical and political decision that put all this region in the very dire need. But most importantly, what this report highlight as well is that the rural areas and peripheral areas are the most affected by this crisis. The reason is that historically, these areas were kind of like how I can say, was victim of some political decision that were putting them in the, how I can say, strong dependent on climate change related activities. So these are agricultural and rural areas where climate change is affecting access to resources and water, and this is why actually this report is highlighting the dire need and the deep, how I can say, effect that climate change is having in population affected in that region.
Modo, I want you to briefly tell me what interventions you propose that maybe are new, have not been tried before, that could lead to different results.
What intervention we propose? IRC is developing some intervention that we call anticipatory action, because today what's happening is that most of the response are more kind of like responding to population already affected. What we are trying is, and what we are calling for is like funding more adaptation programming, because currently the climate funding are more focused on mitigation. We know that these countries contributed very little in terms of like greenhouse gas emission, but these population are highly affected. So what we are proposing is, and what we are calling for is more funding for adaptation measures that will allow this population to better deal with climate affected crisis.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Modo, and we'll have to leave it there. Modo Diao, the IRC's Regional Vice President for West Africa. Well, that's all from the program. Please share your feedback on social media at Waihiga Mwaura. From me,